Welcome to the series of lectures on Math 9. We are now in Chapter 5, Absolute Value Equations and Inequalities. And Lesson 5.1 would be Definition of Absolute Value and Absolute Value Equation. So, our objective here is to define what an absolute value is. At the same time, we will define an absolute value equation. Okay, so let's start by defining absolute value. Okay, so the definition of absolute value here would be, let's say the absolute value of triangle is equal to itself if this is greater or equal to 0, or negative of itself if this number is less than 0. Okay? This is the definition of absolute value you had in the previous years. For example here, if I ask you what's the absolute value of 5, we know that 5 is greater or equal to 0. So, its absolute value should be equal to itself, 5. What happens if I say the absolute value of negative 5? Here, negative 5 is less than 0. So, its absolute value should be the negative of itself, or negative of negative 5. This gives me a 5. Are we saying therefore that the absolute value of a number is always positive? No, because we have the 0 here. Absolute value of 0 is 0. And I can say that the absolute value of a number will be non-negative. That is, it will be either 0 or a positive number. Okay, now suppose we apply this definition of absolute value to simplify this expression. Let's say square root of 2 minus square root of 3 absolute value. If we are going to remove the absolute value symbol here, then we have to write this one here such that when they are outside the absolute value symbol, their difference should be positive. It's the same as saying we are going to determine which of these two numbers is bigger, and that will be our minuend. If square root of 3 is bigger than square root of 2, then I can have this one rewritten without the absolute value by just saying square root of 3 minus square root of 2. Or, if we know that this one is a negative number, this is really a negative number, square root of 2 minus square root of 3, then the absolute value of square root of 2 minus square root of 3 should be the negative of this expression, or it's the same square root of 3 minus square root of 2. Okay? Now, what about this one here? 3.14 minus pi, absolute value. We know that pi is greater than 3.14. So, which means this is 3.14 minus pi is a negative number. So, if you remove the absolute value symbol there, you should have a negative before 3.14 minus pi, or I get here pi minus 3.14. Okay? Now, what about if we have here absolute value of x minus 2? in this expression, we do not know what x minus 2 is. So therefore, we are going to define it as we have defined this expression here. The absolute value of x minus 2 will be itself, provided this difference is greater or equal to 0. And it will be the negative of itself if that difference is less than 0. Okay, let's not confuse ourselves here. The absolute value of this expression is itself if this number is positive. When will this number be positive? When x will be greater or equal to 2. If you take any number greater or equal to 2, let's say 5, the absolute value of 5 minus 2 is itself 5 minus 2, which is 3. Okay? Now, it will be the negative of itself if x is less than 2. Let's take a number less than 2. Let's say 0. Here, 0 minus 2 is negative. Therefore, its absolute value is the negative of it. Okay? What about, let's have another number. Let's say, what is this without the absolute value sign? This symbol means that the absolute value of this expression will be itself x squared minus 9 if x squared minus 9 greater or equal to 0, or negative of itself if x squared minus 9 less than 0. Okay, so that we have already had applied this definition of absolute value here. Let's have the definition of an absolute value equation. So, definition of absolute value equation. What is an absolute value equation? So, it is an equation containing a variable enclosed with an absolute value symbol. Okay? Okay, so if we define this, if we have this as our definition for our absolute value equation, we can say this ax plus b equals c can be an absolute value equation provided a, b, c element real and a is not equal to 0. This one will give us an absolute value equation in the variable x. Okay? Example here. This is an absolute value equation in x. But this is not an absolute value equation in x because there is no variable inside the absolute value symbol. Okay, what about this one here? X minus 1 squared. This is an absolute value equation. Why is that so? Because by definition, we can have this as absolute value of x minus 1 equals 7. So we will be dealing with absolute value equations in the next video.